Welcome to SHS3 Integrated Science Revision Session. My name is Esiama Kufuor. In this session, we'll be looking at candidates' responses. The lesson is designed to have studio students answer typical WASSCE examination questions and their responses analyzed with comments explaining the strengths and weaknesses of the answers. That is, where and why marks were awarded to help candidates interpret WAEC standards and help them to refine their examination techniques. Let us begin by introducing our studio students. We'll begin from the back.
Godwin,
Christian,
Letitia, Efua,
Smith.
Let us go through the questions together. Question A. Define ionic bond. B. Write the correct chemical formula of calcium nitride. C. Write a balanced chemical equation of the following reaction. pH3 plus O2 producing P2O5 and H2O. D. Draw the structure of 2,2-dimethylpropane. E. Describe briefly how you would test for hydrogen gas. You have 10 minutes to answer the questions. You can now start. The candidates have presented their answers. Let us analyze their responses and see examiners' comments. Let us start with the response of the first candidate. This candidate defined ionic bond as a force of attraction between two atoms. The candidate failed to appreciate that ionic bond does not exist between just any two atoms. For example, they do not exist between two nonmetals or two metals. This makes the answer wrong and therefore is awarded 0 mark out of 2. B. The candidate failed to recall the correct valencies of both atoms, that is calcium and nitrogen, and therefore was not able to apply it to get the correct answer. So she is awarded 0 mark out of 1. C. The candidate balanced the equation by changing the formulae of reactants and products. Chemical equation is not balanced by changing the chemical formulae. This renders the answer wrong, and therefore she is awarded 0 mark out of 1. D. The candidate was able to identify the parent structure, the substituents correctly, but failed to include the hydrogen atoms. In other words, the candidate provided skeletal diagram, and this makes the answer wrong, and therefore she is awarded 0 mark out of 1. E. Here, the candidate did not specify the kind of splints required to test for the gas. However, the expected observation was given, and therefore the student is awarded 1 mark out of 2. The candidate said, put a splint in the gas. A pop sound indicates the presence of hydrogen gas. Once the student did not indicate the type of splint, it makes the answer wrong, and therefore is awarded 1 mark out of 2. Let us turn our attention to the response of the second candidate. This candidate defined ionic bond as the complete transfer of electrons from a non-metal to a metal. The candidate gave an explanation for ionic bond formation, but the question asks for definition. Again, electrons are transferred from metals to non-metals instead. This makes the answer wrong, and therefore the candidate is awarded 0 mark out of 2. The candidate was able to recall the valencies of calcium to be 2 and that of nitrogen to be 3. That is by subtracting 5, which is supposed to be the group number of nitrogen, from 8, yielding 3, and apply the 2 valencies correctly to determine the correct formula of calcium nitride. Calcium nitride to be Ca subscript 3 and subscript 2, and therefore she is awarded 1 mark out of 1. C. The candidate gave correct balanced chemical equation. That is, by changing the stoichiometric coefficient of pH subscript 3 by 2 and that of oxygen by 4 and water to the product side by 3. And therefore, she is awarded 1 mark out of 1. D. The candidate gave the correct structure that satisfies the requirement of IUPAC nomenclature. That is, she was able to identify the parent structure, which is the longest continuous carbon chain, to have 3 carbon atoms in it. Then she was also able to identify the side chains, that is 2 methyl groups, both of which are positioned on the second carbon atom, and therefore is awarded 1 mark out of 1. E. The candidate demonstrated one of the misconceptions of students about the test for hydrogen. She gave the answer of the test for oxygen instead, making the response incorrect. She said, put a glowing splint in the gas. If it rekindles, the gas present is hydrogen gas. This is the test for oxygen gas instead of hydrogen. And this makes the answer wrong, and therefore the candidate is awarded 0 mark out of 2. Let us turn our attention to the response of the third student. She defined ionic bond as electrostatic force of attraction that exists between a cation and an anion. This is a concise and a correct model definition of ionic bond, and therefore she is awarded 2 marks out of 2. B. The candidate was able to recall the valencies of calcium and nitrogen correctly. Calcium, she recalled that the valency is 2, and nitrogen is in group 5. Therefore, if you subtract 5 from 8, you will get 3. And apply them correctly to get the correct formula for calcium nitride, which is supposed to be Ca subscript 3 and N subscript 2. Therefore, she's awarded 1 mark out of 1. C. The candidate gave a correct balanced chemical equation. That is, she balanced the total number of phosphorus. On the left-hand side, the total number of phosphorus was 1, and on the right-hand side, the total number of phosphorus was 2. So she placed 2 in front of pH subscript 3. Then she went ahead to balance the total number of hydrogen. The total number of hydrogen on the left-hand side became 6, and that on the right-hand side was 2. And therefore, she placed 3 in front of the water molecule. Then finally, she balanced the total number of oxygens by getting the total number of oxygens on the right-hand side to be 8, and the total number of oxygen on the left-hand side to be 2. So she placed 4 in front of the oxygen to balance the whole equation. And therefore, she is awarded 1 mark out of 1. D. The structure provided by this candidate omitted one of the methyl side chains, rendering the answer incorrect. The candidate was able to identify the parent structure, identify one of the side chains, but failed to identify the presence of another side chain, and this rendered the whole structure incorrect. So she is awarded mark of 0 out of 1. Finally, E. The candidate gave a model response for testing for hydrogen gas. That is, put a lighted splint in the gas. A squeaky pop indicates the presence of hydrogen gas. Therefore, the candidate is awarded 2 marks out of 2. Let us see how Smith should have answered his question to get maximum marks. Smith, you should have appreciated that force of attraction or electrostatic force of attraction exists between a cation and an anion in ionic bond, not just any other 2 atoms. Now let's move on to B. Mark was not awarded because you failed to recall the correct valencies of calcium and nitrogen, and so you couldn't apply them well to get the correct answer. Yes.
How can I commit all the balances of the element to memory?
Yeah, it's difficult. At least you are expected to know the first 20 elements. Now there's a model here that will help you recall them and recall them correctly. So let us take a look at it. Now, you can use this model to get the valency of at least the first 20 elements easily. Now, for the purpose of getting the valency, I have moved hydrogen to group 1 because hydrogen has a valency of 1. Now, the N represents the group number. And so all the elements here are in group 1. Those here are in group 2, group 3, group 4, group 5. All the elements to the left of group 4, or should I say group 5, their valency is equal to the group number. So all the elements here, they are in group 1, and therefore they have a valency of 1. Beryllium, magnesium, calcium, they are in group 2, and therefore they have a valency of 2. Boron and aluminium, they are in group 3, and therefore they will have a valency of 3, and so on and so forth. Are you okay? Now, all the elements to the right, their valency is determined by subtracting the group number, that is N, from 8. So, nitrogen and phosphorus, they are in group 5. If we subtract 5 from 8, you get 3. So, nitrogen and phosphorus have a valency of 3. Then, oxygen and sulfur, they are in group 6. If you subtract 6 from 8, you get 2. So, they have a valency of 2. That is how we determine the valency of at least the first 20 elements. This model will help you a lot. So you don't need to commit them to memory. Just have a mental picture of this, and you'll be able to determine the valency of at least the first 20 elements from it easily. Let us look at C. Mark was not awarded because you balance the chemical equation by changing the chemical formula. Chemical equations are not balanced by changing the chemical formula. And so you lost the mark. We rather change the stoichiometric coefficients and not the chemical formula. Yes.
Are all the total of the elements not balanced? And if yes, why can't the student earn a mark?
Yes, they are balanced, all right. But you have changed the identity of the compound. For example, the equation is like this. You had PH3 phosphine plus oxygen going to give you P2O5 plus H2O. This compound is called phosphine. Now, you balance it by changing the subscript here from 1 to 2, like this, in order to make the number of phosphorus the same. Now, this compound or molecule as you have here is no more called phosphine, but something else. So you have changed the identity of the compound, and this makes the whole equation that you have balanced, even though you have maneuvered to make the number of atoms the same. You've changed the identity. It's no more phosphine, and therefore your answer is what? Wrong. Chemical equations are balanced by changing the stoichiometric coefficients and not the subscript. I hope it is clear.
If it's not, if it changes, then if it's not phosphine, then what is it called?
Oh, it's this one. There's no compound like that. There's no chemical compound like that. Yes. So balancing chemical equations involve changing the stoichiometric coefficient. What I mean by stoichiometric coefficient is the number in front of the chemical formula. The number in front of the chemical formula. We change them by try and error. Are you okay? But normally you start from all other atoms except oxygen and hydrogen. From there you move to hydrogen and you balance oxygen lastly. So what I mean by stoichiometric coefficient, I mean the number that is here, the number that is here, and the number that is in front of the chemical compound. and not the chemical formula. We don't change the subscript, but we change the stoichiometric coefficient, which is supposed to be the numbers in front of the compounds in the equation. I hope I'm clear. You provided skeletal structure instead of a full structure. Your structure was not complete. You were able to identify the parent structure. You were able to identify the side chains. You positioned them correctly, but you left out the hydrogen atoms. So it became what? A carbon skeleton. Are you okay? You give a skeletal diagram, and therefore you lost the marks.
The parent structure was correct. The side chain is rightly positioned on the carbon chain. Why can't I earn half a mark?
Like I said previously, science is a technical subject. The IUPAC system of naming organic compounds has got certain rules, and the rules ought to be observed strictly. If you omit one or misapply one, it will result in getting what? A wrong answer. Now, you rightly determined the parent structure, you rightly identified the side chain, and you left out the hydrogens. The positions could have been taken by any other atom. It could be chlorine, it could be fluorine, it could be any other atom. So once you left out the hydrogens, it's made the structure what? Meaningless. And that is why you did not get a mark. So you need to observe the rules and observe them what? Strictly. Are you okay? And you need to get a full structure and not a skeletal what? Structure to earn a mark. Have I made myself clear?
Thank you.
Okay. Then finally, E. You should have specified the kind of splint that is used in testing for the presence of hydrogen gas. You just said splints, but there are two types of splints. We have glowing splints and lighted splints. The lighted splint is just something like a match. That is, lighted. If you light a match with a flame, it can be termed as what? A lighted splint. Then when you blow the match and it is glowing with some fumes coming, we term it as what? Glowing splints. We use lighted splints to test for the presence of what? Hydrogen, not just splints. Are you okay? So you needed to what? State specifically the type of splint to get your full mark. Are you with me? Yeah. Very good. Okay. Let us turn our attention to the response of Christian. Christian was able to get question C correctly and questions E correctly. Now let us look at your response for A. Full mark was not awarded because you gave an incorrect response. Ionic bond is not formed by a non-metal losing an electron to a metal. Rather, it is formed by a metal losing an electron, or there is complete electron transfer from a metal to a non-metal and not from non-metal to a metal. In any case, the question asks for the definition of ionic bond and not the formation of ionic bond. So you should have said that ionic bond is an electrostatic force of attraction that exists between a cation and an anion, or two oppositely charged ions, to get your full mark. Have I made myself clear? Then in D, you gave the response for the test of oxygen. You said put a glowing splint in a gas, and if it rekindles, then it means the gas is hydrogen. This is rather the test for oxygen gas. You should have said put a lighted splint and a squeaky pop sound indicates the presence of hydrogen. So you rather gave the test for oxygen in this situation, and that's why you lost the mark. Have I made myself clear? Let us look at the response of Efua and what she could have done to improve her answer. Efua did very well. She nearly got everything correct, except D, her response in D. Efua, you failed to realize that the prefix dimethyl indicates that there are two methyl groups present, and therefore you only indicated one of them. You should have indicated the other one. And the other one was also on the second carbon atom. So you should have done that. You should have positioned the second methyl group on the carbon atom to score the full mark. This was the only answer that you had wrong. You did well. Keep it up.
Thank you.
All too soon, my dear viewers, we've come to the end of the lesson. Let us take a look at the common mistakes that candidates made in answering the questions. A, failing to state that oppositely charged ions or cations and anions undergo electrostatic attraction to give ionic bond. Giving the incorrect definition of ionic bonding. B, failing to recall the valencies of calcium and nitrogen correctly and deducing the right formula. C, failing to balance chemical equation by changing the chemical formula or the subscripts instead of the stoichiometric coefficients. D, giving incomplete structure of the compound, failing to show the hydrogen atoms, and failing to pay attention to details with reference to the structure. E, failing to realize that lighter splint is used to test for hydrogen and not glowing splint or splints, and failing to appreciate that the expected observation is squeaky pop sound and not rekindling of glowing splints. Studio candidates, thank you for your answers. Until we meet again, use models, mind maps, concept maps to summarize your notes, and also use self-testing to check your knowledge in SHS Integrated Science. Have a nice day.